And Chief Executive of Foundation for Defense of Democracies from his week-long trip to Israel, where he met with senior diplomatic and military officials. Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Mike.
So you heard President Biden suggesting a longer pause in fighting to get more prisoners out. Your thoughts?
Look, there's overwhelming pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israeli government to get the hostages out, right? Israeli society is a society that cherishes every life. They celebrate life. Unfortunately, they're dealing with a terrorist enemy that celebrates death. And so they have no choice but to agree to this ceasefire, to get these hostages out, to get these babies and children and women and mothers and fathers out. And Hamas, of course, will play games with the psychological fragility of the country in order to try and advance their own terrorist aims.
You heard your friend, the former prime minister, say I think about 10 days would be the max for a pause. Does that seem to make sense to you?
Well, it would seem to make sense in order to get most of the hostages out. I'm fearful that Hamas won't agree to this, and they'll start to play games. They're already playing games. They had agreed to provide both children and mothers and families. They didn't do that today. They've said that they're not going to provide soldiers back. I mean, there's young Israeli soldiers, women and men who are there, and they'll play games with that. So I'm fearful that they're not going to honor any agreement they commit to, and they want to keep those hostages both as bargaining chips and I fear one day to kill them.
I mentioned you were just in Israel. What are you hearing from the Israelis about their partnership with President Biden and their overall mood at this point?
Yeah, I think they're very appreciative of President Biden and of the American Congress, the American people, for the overwhelming support that the United States has provided. I personally think that, President Biden probably deserves an A for his Hamas policy, but I think he deserves an F for his Iran policy, because behind the scenes in Tehran is the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, who really is orchestrating all of this. I mean, he has provided hundreds of millions of dollars to Hamas, billions of dollars to Hezbollah, the other terrorist organization currently fighting Israel on the northern border, to the Houthi terrorists in Yemen who are firing missiles at Israel as we speak. And so he, behind the scenes, has surrounded Israel with this ring of fire, and he's activating his terrorist proxies on every border, including, by the way, Mike, dozens of attacks against U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria.
Absolutely. So what more should the president do, in your view?
Well, first and foremost, the president should stop releasing tens of billions of dollars to Iran. I mean, he provided $6 billion initially in exchange for U.S. hostages. Now $10 billion he's earmarked to give back to the Iranians. And he hasn't enforced oil sanctions against Iran, which has provided probably $25 to $35 billion in additional oil for this regime. So it's quite a policy where, on one hand, Israel has to fight on Hamas, an Iran-backed proxy, and on the other hand, the President of the United States is providing tens of billions of dollars to this Islamic regime in Tehran that is threatening America and Israel.
What about the difficulty of the Israelis carrying out this removal of Hamas with television cameras and all kinds of cameras everywhere? It's not pleasant.
Listen, this is brutal. I mean, if you can imagine if television cameras had accompanied the American allies in World War II as they fought their way through Europe, right? I mean, this is every single action of Israel is under intense scrutiny, and they're certainly not getting a fair shake from most of the media in how they fight this. And it's the most brutal urban combat they can imagine, where Hamas is using their own civilians as human shields. Hamas has no compunction about killing hundreds of thousands of Palestinians if they could, in order to achieve their terrorist objectives.
Mark Dubowitz, grateful for your analysis and your time today, sir.
Thanks for having me, Mike.